All right, let's talk about code. If you've ever stared at a software system and it felt like you were looking at a completely hopeless, tangled ball of yarn, well, you're going to love this. Today we're digging into the Mediator pattern. It's an amazing tool for bringing a little bit of order back to all that chaos. So let's get into it.
So, let me ask you something. Does it feel like your software components are all gossiping behind your back? You know that feeling, right? Where you make a change to one tiny little piece of your app and suddenly a bunch of other, totally unrelated things just break. If that sounds painfully familiar, trust me, you are not alone. It's one of the biggest headaches in development.
And this headache, this problem, it's got a name you've probably heard a million times: spaghetti code. And honestly, it's the perfect name for it. It's just a tangled mess where everything is hopelessly connected to everything else.
So here's where that spaghetti really comes from. Your customer profile component, for example, it has to know all about order history and shipping and payment. Then your order history needs to know about the customer profile and product details. You see, it creates this massive fragile web. When you change one thing, you get this ripple effect that can break a ton of other things you didn't even think about.
The result of all this is what we call tight coupling. And what that really means is that trying to reuse anything is a nightmare. Want to pull out that shipping address component to use in another project? Good luck. It's going to try and drag all its other dependencies along with it. Making a simple change feels like you're playing Jenga. You pull out one little block and just pray the whole thing doesn't come crashing down.
So how in the world do we fix this? Well, to find the solution, let's actually step away from code for a second and think about a different kind of complex system: an airport. This leads us to, honestly, the perfect analogy: the air traffic controller.
Just imagine an airport with no control tower. It would be absolute chaos, right? Every single pilot would have to talk to every other pilot to figure out who's landing, who's taking off. It's just not going to work. But now, picture it with a tower. Suddenly, there's order. Every pilot talks to one, and only one, central point, the tower. And the tower coordinates everything. It's safe, it's efficient, it just makes sense.
And here's the really important part of that analogy. The air traffic controller doesn't actually fly the planes. The pilot is still 100% in charge of their own aircraft. The tower's only job is to manage the communication between all the different planes. It's just a central hub for messages. That's it.
So you can probably see where this is going. How does this apply to our code? Well, that air traffic controller, that's the perfect way to think about our software solution. It's time to officially meet the Mediator pattern.
Okay, here's the official textbook definition. Basically, it's a pattern that gets rid of all those chaotic direct connections by making everything talk through one central object, our mediator. No more components talking to each other directly. All communication has to go through the proper channel.
And the mapping from our analogy is just super straightforward. The airplanes, those are our software components. Things like buttons, forms, text fields. The air traffic controller, that's our mediator object. And a pilot calling into the tower is just a component sending a little notification to the mediator. Simple as that.
So how does this whole thing work in practice? It's really just a simple four-step dance. First, something happens. Let's say a user clicks a checkbox. Step 2, that checkbox doesn't shout out to every other component on the page. Nope, it just quietly tells the mediator, hey, I've been checked. 3, and this is the absolute key, the checkbox has no idea what happens next. It doesn't care. Its job is totally done. And finally, step 4, the mediator gets that message and decides who else needs to know. It might look over at the submit button and say, okay, you can be enabled now.
Now this brings a ton of beautiful order to our system. But like any really powerful tool, you've got to be careful. It comes with a big potential for overload. So let's break down the pros and cons.
The benefits? They're fantastic. First off, you drastically reduce coupling. Components aren't all tangled up anymore. That immediately leads to way better reusability. And maintenance gets so much easier because all that complicated interaction logic now lives in just one place, the mediator. Best of all, your components can finally just focus on their one job instead of also having to be communication experts.
This chart really gives you a feel for just how dramatic the change is. You're moving from that messy, many-to-many web of connections on the left to a much cleaner, simpler hub-and-spoke model on the right. As those dependencies plummet, so does the headache of maintaining the code.
But here is the big flashing warning sign. With all this great power comes some pretty serious responsibility. The single biggest danger of using the mediator pattern is that it can slowly turn into something we call a God object.
So what's a God object?
It's an anti-pattern where one single class just becomes this monster. It knows everything, it does everything. In our analogy, it's like our air traffic controller suddenly decides it's also going to fly the planes, handle the baggage, and sell snacks. You've just traded one kind of mess for another, a centralized monster that's impossible to work with.
So the big question is, how do we get this right? How do we build an effective central command center without accidentally creating one of those monsters?
It all comes down to this one single, absolutely crucial rule you have to remember. A mediator centralizes communication, not business logic. It's a switchboard operator, not the CEO. So when a user profile gets updated, that component tells the mediator, hey, I was just updated. The mediator then turns around and tells the order history component, you should probably refresh your data. The mediator has no idea how to refresh the data. That logic stays right where it belongs. It just connects the dots. So the real takeaway here is pretty clear. You should reach for this pattern when you find yourself right back in that tangled mess we started with, when you just can't reason about how your components are talking to each other anymore, or when one tiny change means you have to go edit a dozen different files. That's your signal. That's when you know it's time to bring in an air traffic controller.
And that's what I want to leave you with. Think about the most tangled, complicated spaghetti code system you've ever had to work on. Looking back now, do you think a central mediator could have untangled it and brought some order to all that chaos? It's a really powerful idea to keep in your back pocket for your next project. Thanks for joining me.